Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome back to part number 2 of my custom Les Paul build. So in part number 1, we did the unboxing, the dry fitting, and kind of an overview of what I want to do with the kit. In today's episode, we're going to be working on the binding. So I've got binding that I want to be putting. Where is it? There it is. I want to be putting a brand new binding on the guitar. So this is white mother of pearl binding. You can have a look at that if the camera will focus. Anyways. I've got a bad camera, so that tends to happen. So the binding that comes with the guitar is kind of a cream plastic, so I'm going to be taking that off today and putting the new one on. A quick little update on the whole plan. A couple changes. So first of all, the headstock that came with the guitar is actually crooked. It's quite crooked too, plus the holes aren't drilled that great. So a little disappointing. I noticed that after I finished editing part 1. So I talked to Solo Guitars about it, and they understood. They're like, we're sorry about that. I talked to them, and I got a little coupon code for my next purchase. So it's something. So I decided that I'm gonna keep this kit, and another reason for that is because this kit is now sold out. It's been only a week since I ordered this kit, and they've already sold out, which is crazy. But without further ado, let's get to the binding replacement. Got everything set up on the desk here. So what I'm going to be doing first is I got a little hair dryer. I got this from Walmart a long time ago, a couple years ago, for like 20 bucks. And I'm just going to be heating this up as I go along. Just giving it a little bit of heat just to soften the glue. And I've got like an old razor blade I found lying around that I'm going to try to get in between the binding and the wood to take it off. Now, if this guitar had been painted or coated or finished, what you would like to do is to take your razor and actually score along the edge. That way when you take the binding off, it doesn't rip off chunks of the finish. But since this is raw wood, it has nothing on it, that step isn't necessary here. So I'm gonna just go ahead and start this process, and I'm probably gonna speed this up and just kind of go through the whole thing just to save you guys some time. That was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. That sucked. Straight up, if I had to do that again, I would have done it differently, but at the end of the day, I worked with what I had and I got the job done. So that's all that matters. So I got all the binding off. I didn't do the best of jobs, but remember, this is the first time I've ever, let me get the camera to focus. There we go. It's the first time I've ever done something like this. So there is a little bit of damage that I've done. A lot of what you're seeing right now is just dried glue that I'll have to scrape off because I need this channel to be nice and clean. So when I put the new binding in, it'll have a fresh surface and the glue will have a fresh. This side I did a really good job of kind of as I went along. I kind of figured a different process out and I got better, but the binding is off. Next step, I'll have to clean up all the glue, and then we'll put the new binding on. I've gone through and cleaned up as much as I can with my chisel. Obviously there's damage. There are some rough spots, but considering that I've never done this before, and I'm not really working with much in terms of the way of tools, I'm pretty happy. I mean, again, like it's definitely not a professional job, but if you look closely, you can definitely tell like it's a binding channel there. So next step, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my new binding, and I'm just going to wrap it around and tape it and heat it up as I need and bending it. And I'm just going to tape it to this and get it ready, leave it for the day. And then tomorrow I'm going to come in and I'm going to glue it, and then I'm going to leave it for a day. As for the neck, now I'm going to be replacing the binding on this as well. I'm probably going to do that some other day, considering how tough this was. This is obviously going to be a lot easier because it's just straight pieces, but I cannot afford to screw the neck up. So I'm going to take my time with the body and get it done, and then I'll get to the neck. In the meantime, if you have any suggestions or ways that you would prefer me do the neck, let me know, obviously in the comments section. Another thing is I'm not sure if I'm still going to actually route the cavity and put binding in the headstock too. I kind of like it the way it is. It's kind of grown on me. I'm going to do the whole thing black. So that's kind of what I'm leaning to. If you think that putting the binding on this would be a good idea too, obviously let me know. But the nut is going to be white, so the binding and the nut are going to kind of form the connection, if you will, where there's that white stripe, of course, running across the entire guitar. So that's kind of where my head's at right now. But next step is I'm going to put the binding on this and just let it sit. We're done putting the binding on. Again, I didn't glue it in. I'm just kind of heated it up and bent it to get it to shape the way I want it to. And then tomorrow, after this is done setting, I'm going to take all this tape off, really make sure I clean out the cavity, and then put the binding on and glue it on. And so that's going to happen tomorrow. So I've got the tape on. This was really difficult to do, this corner here, so I had to really heat this up. It's not perfect, but it's better. So I'm hoping that tomorrow, that once this sets into the new kind of shape, once I go in with the heat gun tomorrow, or the hair dryer in my case, this will fit right snug to the body. And so again, like kind of running my finger along the binding and the guitar body, there's definitely a bit of a difference. Both bindings are 1.5 millimeters in thickness, but of course when I took the old binding out, there's some glue residue still in the channel. So tomorrow I'm going to make sure I really go in there and scrape it out, and then hopefully I'll get a buddy to come help me put this on, because 4 sets of hands are definitely a lot better than 2. I've let this sit overnight. I've got the binding on again, no glue on, so I'm going to take all the tape off and I'm just going to see what the binding did, if it held its form. If it did, it's going to make it a lot easier for the gluing process. If it didn't, it just means more work for me. So let's start taking this tape off. All right, we got it all off, and this is what we're left with. So it did pretty well. It held its shape for the most part. I mean, at the end of the day, this is going to be a lot easier to glue on than what I had before. So this is an optional step. You don't have to do this. The reason why I did this is because I saw another guy. I watched a lot of Les Paul builds, and one of the guys did this, and I thought that was a really good idea. So keep in mind, this binding is too tall for this guitar right now. This is 10 millimeters. The stock binding is 5.5, so we'll have to grind this down. I could choose to cut it and then put it on, but the reason why I'm not doing that is because since I'm sanding and cleaning these channels, if I go deeper on one side, and I've already cut this to 5.5, then I'm kind of screwed. So I'm just going to put it on as is, and then afterwards I'll grind it down and sand it and get it flush with the rest of the guitar. So next, what I'll do is I'm just going to go in and really make sure that I've got all these channels clean. So there's still quite a little bit of glue residue left. So I want to go in, probably some 100 grit, and just get it all nice and clean. So I'm going to do that now. Okay, I've gone in and I've hit it with 400 throughout the channel. It's feeling nice and smooth now. So the next step is I'm going to get the binding. I'm going to glue it in with some crazy glue, or super glue rather, just this stuff. I'm going to put it in. What I didn't realize is this tape is not going to work well for this application because it's too wide and doesn't stick as much. So I'm going to actually have to run to the hardware store and go pick up some tape that's skinnier and really high adhesive. They do make specific binding tape, and it does exactly what I'm doing here. But it's hard to get out of stores because it's more of a specialty item, but I'm sure I can get something that's similar enough. And while I'm there, I'm probably going to go pick up some more grits of sandpaper, so I will be right back. It is time to put the new binding on the guitars. So it's a pretty straightforward process rather. Once you've cleaned out the channel, in my case, it's all good to go. My binding has already been kind of pre-prepared. It's kind of already in the shape that I want to put on the guitar. Now I'm going to put on a pair of gloves and some goggles. You can never be safe, too safe. Sorry, better safe than sorry is what I'm trying to say. And I've got some binding tape. For this, it's just Scotch masking tape that has high adhesion. That's really all you need. So this is just 3M stuff. And I'm going to use this to hold the binding on. So the glue that we're using is Gorilla Glue. Let's see if it focuses. There we go. It did it. Super glue from Gorilla Glue. This stuff dries in 10 seconds, so I barely have any time. So it's a pretty unforgiving glue, but I think it'll be good to have that fast drying. That way I can kind of just get the tape on real quick and not have to worry about, you know, the stuff coming off. It'll take 24 hours for the stuff to cure, so obviously for 24 hours I'm not going to be doing anything with the guitar. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly just prepare a bunch of strips here, and I'm just going to kind of leave a whole bunch and just have them ready to go, because since I'm wearing gloves, you know, it's hard to kind of get the tape out. So I'll just do 2 for now. And then as I put the glue on, I'll use a toothpick to smear it. I'm just going to be doing 1 drop of glue in small sections at a time as I go along. You don't need a lot of this stuff. So without further ado, let's get started. That took me an hour. That was pretty hard. So I got the binding glued in and taped up, and I did my best. It's not perfect, but the hardest part was definitely the horn right here. That I had to really get in there with a hairdryer and make sure that this bend was as tight as I can get it possible to the cavity. Again, it's not perfect, but I did the best that I could. At the end of the day, we'll see what happens when I take the tape off. But this actually isn't that bad of a finish idea, eh? You got the masking tape burst, right? No? Okay. Anyways, we're gonna let this dry for 24 hours. Let it cure. The glue's already dried, but we need to let it cure for 24 hours. Then I'll take all the masking tape off, and we'll see what we're left with. All right, it has been 24 hours, just under 24 hours, more like 22, but it doesn't matter. I'm going to start taking this tape off, and let's see what kind of glue job I did. Yeah, honestly, I didn't do a very bad job. I mean, like, this is pretty good. I'm pretty pleased with this. From what I've read, the binding is always the hardest part about kind of the woodworking aspect of the guitar, and I can certainly see why. This was extremely challenging, but considering that I've never ever done this before, I'd give myself like a solid 3.5 or even a 4 out of 5 on the quality of the job. So the only spot we're gonna have to go back and touch it up is the horn. So right here, you can see there's quite a gap. So I'm gonna have to heat this up and to put the glue in there. I'm just gonna do that off camera because you've already seen how I went about and did this. So I'll do that on my own time. What I do need to think about is obviously this binding is too tall, and I explained why that I put it on as I did. So I'm gonna have to find a way to kind of grind this down. Originally, I was gonna use a Dremel, but the problem with that is that if I use a Dremel, it's gonna heat the plastic up, and the glue's already cured on there. So if I use a Dremel, it's gonna really unseat the glue, and I definitely don't want to do that. It's gonna melt the plastic as well. So I'm gonna have to think of something else. Still about maybe using some cutters, but it's gonna be tricky. So I'm gonna have to think of something, but I'll figure something out. In the meantime, there are some spots where there's a little bit of a gap between the binding and the edge. So what I'm gonna do for that is I went out and I actually picked up some wood filler. If I can just grab it from my bag here. I've got some wood filler, and so I'm definitely fine with using it on the edge. Since I'm going from a black to a purple burst, like you're not going to be able to tell the difference between the raw wood and the wood filler, since it's going to be in the edge. It's not going to be noticeable. So I'm totally fine with using that. As for the sides, I got it on there really flush, so I'm really, really pumped about that. And what I'm going to do is the spots where the binding is a little thicker than the body, I'm just going to use my razor blade. If I can find it, wherever the heck I put it. Where did I put it? Okay, damn it. Misplacing my tools. Anyways, if I were to use a razor, let's just pretend this chisel end is a razor. I would run the chisel, or in this case, rather the razor, like that, along the edge, and that would take the binding off in tiny little chunks, and plus that'll match the contour of the body as opposed to going in with sandpaper or a chisel. So I'm pretty happy. The hardest part of the build is done, and yeah, next I'll start grinding this off. My dad showed me a really good way to get the binding off or to scrape it off, and in the process of showing me, he did the whole thing himself. So thank you, Dad. I appreciate that. What he did was he took a razor blade, like a knife, a full-on knife, and he went in and he cut towards himself and kind of went upwards towards the end so as to not scratch the guitar. So big shout out to my dad for doing that for me. Next step, I've got some 100 grit sandpaper. So he got it scraped down pretty tight, pretty close to the surface of the guitar. There's probably about 1 millimeter or 2 millimeters of space. That still needs to be grinded down. So I'm going to take this 100 grit sandpaper and I'm going to get to work here. All right, so that took me about 1 hour and 15 minutes, but I got the binding nice and flush now with the body. So I went in there with the razor blade and 100 grit sandpaper, and I got the binding nice and flush. So again, this corner here, I'm gonna have to heat this up and rework it and re-glue this. But before I do that, I'm gonna go in and now I'm gonna do the sides and get these nice and flush. But I'm gonna hold off on doing that for a little bit. I'm just gonna go take a break because that was pretty exhausting. and my fingers hurt quite a bit from grasping that razor blade. So I'll see you guys in a bit. All right, so I went in there, got the binding all done. It's nice and flush now along the sides. So we have now 100% replaced the binding and put the new one, and we've shaped it down to size. So you might notice that on the sides there's a little bit of a white haze running along the binding. That's because I was going in there with a bit of a higher grit sandpaper to smooth it down. I'm not worried about that at all because I still have to go in here and finish sand the entire thing anyways. So any scratches or anything that I put in now, it's just gonna come off later when I go in with my 220 and then my 400 and so on and so forth. As for the top, I've got this glued, and you might notice there's that little, let's see if I can zoom in, right here, there's a little bit of a gap. So right there, the reason why that's there is because when I first started the binding removal, this is where I started with my blade, and I ended up gouging the wood a little bit. So I'm gonna go in there with some wood filler later when this glue is dried and sand over top of it to make it flush. It's not gonna matter a whole lot, even if it's the wrong color wood filler, because I'm going over the edges with black anyways, so you're not even gonna notice that. And once it's under a good couple coats of finish, it won't even be noticeable. So I'm really excited. I've got the binding 100% swapped on the body, so that's really cool. I'll be honest, I'm pretty proud of myself. I don't have much experience. I have no experience with woodworking at all, and so all the videos I've seen have all stated that binding is the toughest job out of anything on the guitar. So we've got the binding replaced on the body. Next step, we'll be replacing the binding on the neck and doing all the fretwork and all that fun stuff. So that's a wrap for episode number 2. Thanks so much for watching. And in episode 3, we'll hit the neck. We'll see you then.